Oh boy, everybody. Hello, welcome back. We're 37 episodes deep as of this week. For those of you who are new here, if any of you are new here, my name is Emmerron. This is the Wireheads podcast, a weekly place for myself and my lovely co-host over here to discuss all things Cyberpunk Red and basically nerd out about it. And yeah. So for those of you who do not know me, I'm an occasional content creator here on Twitch and YouTube, primarily a pro GM over on StartPlaying, and of course joining me as always is my co-host.
Hello everybody, I'm Diamond Dust. I am a net running VTuber, mainly over here on Twitch. I also am working on some stuff for YouTube. And as of recent, starting to dive into the idea of being a politician. With that out of the way, other than that, I'm a professional GM over here on StartPlaying Games. Or, well, not over here, over on StartPlaying Games. YouTube, click on the link below, you'll see what StartPlaying Games is. Anyone else, just !StartPlaying, you'll be able to find it on the commands. Over in my chat, I don't know if you got that set up for you over there by chance, Emmerron, but
don't. But if you join my Discord, which I will ping, and you can ping it yourself at any time here in chat by doing !Discord. If you're here live Twitch, where we record these every Thursday at 4:30 Pacific or 6:30 Central. I have everything on my Discord, so when I do post new games, it is somewhat rare these days just because I'm getting a very, very, very full schedule, which is a good thing for me. But any of you who want to play at my table, if you ever do want to hear about a game when it goes live, when I do get those posted, they are up on my Discord, and that is where we will play them as well. I make a custom channel for every game so that we can keep all of that nice and organized. So if you are interested, that is a place where you can find my games. Please.
Also, just one last note as well. Valkyrie, also known as Mrs. Dust, the other Dust woman, she is going to be getting on to StartPlaying here pretty soon. Ooh. As a GM as well. She's planning on an Elflines campaign.
Oh hell yeah! All right, yeah. I just started one of those, so it
continues.
Big fan of that. Yep. No, that's awesome.
We love ourselves. Night City's #1 MMORPG, Elflines Online.
We do. I love it as a plot device, if nothing else. It's so much fun. So that out of the way. Let's do one thing here real quick that doesn't really pertain to our topic this week. And some of you, I think, when we come out the other end of this week's episode, for those of you who watch the entire thing front to back, because for those of you who are watching this later on YouTube, of course, you'll notice this is just a part one. I have our first part on our odd episodes. Diamond has our first part on the evens, and then we switch. So whomever is part 2 or part 1 is linked down below the video of the channel. So this week, you'll probably be watching mine first if you're doing this in chronological order. If you're not and you're coming back from Diamond's half of the episode, welcome to the past, where I have no idea what Diamond has talked about so far. I'm sure it's very insightful, but
you mean when is tomorrow?
Yeah, now.
Later.
When is now? We just missed it.
I love a good Spaceballs reference. Yeah, Emmerron had decided that this was just going to be more of an honorable mention for this week than it was going to be its own full episode, because normally we when a new DLC drops, we'll talk about it in full. This DLC, while in fact it was good,
it's not super dense for discussion. Unlike the Atlas had a lot. It was very info dense, so it kind of makes sense that the follow up to that would probably be less so. And that is not to say that the Logos DLC we just got does not have info in it. It does. Some very interesting info. That said, there's not really a lot to talk about in there that isn't us simply speculating on what might be coming. And that would not feel great to sit there and just kind of speculate. Those aren't super, like, those can be fun discussions, don't get me wrong, but they're not something that we want to spend like a whole hour, I think, or at least I don't want to spend a whole hour. I won't speak for Diamond, but just raw speculating, you know, for what's going on. So we want to talk about something that there's just a tiny bit more substance to for topics this week. That said, the DLC is great. I would recommend going and checking it out.
Yeah, there's a lot of little Easter eggs in there. Also, I think this is the first time we actually get a view of a few groups' logos, including the legendary Max Tack.
Yes, I don't believe we've seen Max Tack at all up to the point that we're in now.
Like, yeah, they've only ever been mentioned, but we've never gotten a logo for them. And we also got Puddle Forge Games making another reprisal in there.
Yep. Again with the ELO.
So, yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah, so other than that, if you've read through many of the other books, you'll recognize a lot of the logos, but there's a few new ones.
There are.
And I think with that, let's jump into today's topic.
Yeah, no, that was, so I just wanted to make sure that got mentioned up front here, so that no one was wondering, well, why aren't they talking about the DLC? That's why. So for today, so last week we talked about, and if you haven't seen it yet, highly recommend going back and checking it out, because it kind of frames, bookends, if you will, the topic for this week. So last week we talked about openings to a campaign and how those look, right? And we talked about end games to a campaign and how those look. And while those definitely, I think, get a little more, they can be a little more defined out the gate to an extent compared to something like the middle of a campaign. And they're a little more based upon the group that you're playing with and the backstories they have, the threads they share in common. The mid-game is chaos, and writing for it is a lot less, I think, formulaic than an end game or an opening to the campaign will kind of be. Obviously, no campaign is truly formulaic. A lot of it goes into what your players are, how they interact with each other, what their history is, both with each other and personally. But there are some principles, I think, to developing the mid-game that, unlike the others where it's more group dependent in terms of what you've got at your table, the mid-game is more about general principles that apply to pretty much every group, I think, I would say. And Diamond, feel free to correct me if I am wrong, where you are, where your experience has kind of shown you otherwise. But I don't think that the mid game is really easily defined by a lot of the stuff that the opening and the ending is.
Unless there is something like really important that you feel that needs to show up during the mid game, I do think you're right on that, where the mid game is going to be like you know where the goalpost is, but you don't know where all the landmines are in the field.
It's a good way to put it, honestly. So there was a question last week. This is why we're on this subject this week. So whomever asked that question, because Diamond, I believe you'd said you knew who it was that presented the. So this, just so everyone knows, this is where this chaos started.
Fish.
Beautiful. So Fish asked, when should the big bad guy present their hand? So I hope you're ready for a 2-hour discussion that kind of gives us a good idea of that, because that is one one element of the overarching collective of storytelling that needs to happen here. So welcome. Thank you for the topic. We're going to now designate this entire 2-part episode to that question. Thank you so much. So I suppose we should start by defining what the mid-game is. Where does the mid-game of your campaign start? Go ahead, Diamond. I'm sorry.
Should we continue to stick with like the 20 to 25 session campaign as kind of the look for when we look at the campaign on a greater scale, like we discussed last week as well?
I think that definitionally for like the campaign as a whole, that'll be useful to present as a timeline. The mid game's weird. Those of you who play chess will understand what I mean by that. Some openings in chess are like 4 moves. They're 4 or 5 moves. They're not like a lot of movement, whereas others are much more complex, and you don't enter the mid game technically until you're like 10 or 12 moves in. So I think that in terms of the session count, the mid game is a little more nebulous. It doesn't have to begin by a particular point. So much like I've seen mid games start as early as session 3. I've seen mid games start as late, probably as session 8 or 9. They're really, really nebulous in the way that we talk about them relative to the overall timeline, at least in my experience. I don't know, Diamond, do you have like a different insight on that or a different opinion on that?
Well, yes, mid-game, yes, nebulous is it's a very good word for trying to find that beginning point. But I have found usually, like for me at my tables, mid-game tends to start somewhere around between session 6 or 7.
Okay.
Because like the first couple jobs, I've always noticed we're still kind of in that forming phase of our group, and then after we get outside that forming phase, we start moving into, further into the story. And I'm also looking at even just from like our group that now meets on Mondays, where the first couple jobs was very much us meeting our crew, and then after that we started rolling into some of the other gigs down the road. Yeah, where I think like Haven't Got a Stitch to Wear was like what was like our third mission, and that was like I feel right where our mid game was starting. Let
me think. What's that? And that might have been the third. That was, I think, your guys' 4th mission. Because I think it was. Mission. Yeah, because I'm pretty sure your first 3, 2 of which obviously were done.
The screams
without. No, because I think of. It gets. This is what I mean. It gets weird because then we have to talk definitionally about what is a gig, what isn't a gig. But I think if we are talking about like collective jobs, if we assume those 2 scream sheets were one job, because they kind of are, we were, I think, 3 deep by the time that we had Randy and Gary join our group, and then that then with them, I think because we got through initially with just the 3 of you, Nyla, and Tito. Drummer. Drummer was the 3rd gig, and it was Night at the Opera, and then the 2 scream sheets prior to that form a single gig. So yeah, we were on like gig 5 technically for the group, 2 with everyone being present.
So
yeah. Bottom line is this, everybody. We were probably about like that 9 or 10 session mark for those of you who had started like back at the very, very beginning before our mid game really started to develop. So qualifier 1 that I will put on on when does the mid game begin? Your crew is a crew. And that is such a basic, simple thing. And you're going to probably say, Emmerron, that is the dumbest thing you've ever said. Of course, that's when the mid game starts. Hell, that's when the game starts. It's no, you're not really a crew until you look to the other people in that crew as people you trust with your life, right? And there's a definite fact and trust finding area at the start of any campaign where there's a little bit of that, like, yeah, we're professionally acquainted, but do we really trust each other? Like, how do I know that next week this guy's not gonna have a knife at my throat, gun at my back, whatever, you know, like, because someone paid them top dollar to do so? That's where, like, there's always, I feel, at least with an element of the group, maybe not the entire group, but there's a either a clickiness or an individuality to the group at the beginning where everyone is very much in it for themselves or like one other person maybe at most. That starts to fade after, like Diamond said, probably about the third or fourth gig usually. Some groups I've played with, they decide very early on, we all know each other, we all come from the same background, and that mid-game develops much more quickly because it's much more like you skip. It's kind of like if you've ever been friends with someone and then ended up like this is the story of my wife's and my relationship is we were friends first a long time ago when we were in middle school, the most awkward phase of your life, right? And then we were friends for a really long time. She moved away, moved back, and suddenly we started dating not long after that. And it was like, and we get to skip that whole first part of that story now, where it's like we don't know each other. Well, we do. We know the most embarrassing parts of each other already. None of that's coming out in the wash later. You know, that's
Hallmark. She comes back home and falls in love with the anyway.
She if you'll believe it, she chased my ass down a street because she was working in a sandwich shop and saw my family walking by. We were moving my brother into his dorm and just happened to walk by the shop where she was working. It really was Hallmark. It was weird. It was very weird. It was weird. I don't know how to describe it any other way. But that is the best analogy I can kind of give to the idea of like, if your group is just met for the first time on gig one, they don't know each other at all, aside from, like I said, maybe one or two of them know each other because they've worked together in the past, or maybe they're related or they're friends prior to the campaign's start. Like, anyone that doesn't know each other needs time to grow that trust. But if you start with that trust built, your mid-game starts much sooner because you're not going to have that awkward, let's get to know each other phase that seems to start with every campaign, you know?
Oh my gosh. My HR exec is going to be like, all right, time for icebreakers. Just kidding. Let's get this done. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, that's truly where the mid game kind of begins, because now the reason for that, just to layer that on top here, is the moment you stop viewing the people that you're working with as acquaintances or like kind of like loose associates, and you start looking at them as your partners in crime and your, you know, people you trust to have your back when the chips are down, that is the important thing for you to work together toward common goals. And I think more often than not, mid games are defined by the common goals that your crew has. Usually it's in pursuit of a lot of common interests that you'll find a lot of your gigs, at least in my experience. So yeah, Diamond, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to layer in there as well now.
Yes, and I think this may also come off of like what I had suggested earlier, when you're no longer little people.
Yes, that's also true.
Now, and I'd say like your second qualifier here, like alongside you being a crew, there's going to be like you guys seeing each other as a crew. The second qualifier is when the fixer, like if say fixer in question calls you, but they know that calling you, they're also calling for your solo, your nomad, your tech, and your med tech to come along with you for this. That they know exactly who they're picking out for this job. Again, it shows like not only you guys seeing other crewmates, but you being viewed as a crew, and that reputation sticks. So like with our group, where we now have obtained a very bad reputation.
I'd say mixed. I'd say more of a mixed reputation. Yeah. To some people, you're very valuable. To others, you're a nightmare.
Yeah, literally being told, keep that rabid dog on a leash. It's just like, okay, all right, we know exactly who you're talking about. But also on top of that, like when you hit the mid game, you're at that point where you are starting to pick up jobs that are probably going to be touching that 1,000 eddy mark more often than the 500 eddy mark.
Yeah.
Given you may start off with 1,000 eddy mark for an early job, but most of your gigs, like most of your early gigs that might be considered easy, are going to be like 500 eds a person.
Yeah. Plus a bonus maybe. Like yeah. I find it's fun. The thing about 500 eddy missions that I find very interesting is that they can quickly snowball up into something much more complicated that you get paid even more for long term. But it's almost a very cloaky way to like kind of be like, well, this is the intro. It sounds so easy, so simple. Please do the job. And then it's like, yeah, so the thing you want us to grab, the fetch quest, the easy, go there, grab it, bring it back. Yeah, it's surrounded by like some of the Maelstrom upper echelons. So what do you want us to do about that? And to what tune are you willing to pay for that? Like, so now we have a different discussion on our hands, but it's a very like, either your fixer's inexperienced or like, I don't know. There's all kinds of ways 500 eddy jobs become much more complicated than they initially sound.
500 eddies, but there also happens to be a little extra something that you find while along the way. You happen to find yourself a nice gun that's you don't just simply find in the local bodega.
It's almost like the meme format, Diamond, where it's like, she's a 10 butt, and then it's some like unhinged commentary. It's the job is a 500 eddy gig, but
and you can always throw weird twists and turns in those, and it'll just be like, well, what will we get paid for?
Yeah.
So once it starts turning, once it goes from you getting paid 500 eddies to, go do this little side quest. Go collect me, 10 Draglin asses or some shit. I don't know. I'm going to throw ELO references in there.
Yeah.
Enjoy. But the next, but like when you hit that next step where it's, you are getting trusted to be paid 1,000 eds each, which, mind you, some people are like, well, 1,000 eds, that's not really a lot of money. Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
That's literally a month's worth of rent, or 2 months at a Cube Hotel if you're going to really slum it in one of those. Or, nearly, half the rent for a 2-bed apartment.
Yeah.
So,
like one gig can set you up for the majority of your recurring expenses for like the next month, potentially. And as long as you don't catch too much heat off of it, that is very good. It's very good. Like, extremely good. Anyone claiming out there, this is, and this will probably be a topic for another day, but I want to mention this up, like, while we're bringing this up. Anyone who says that the IP or eddy budgets for gigs and sessions of the game aren't high enough, I guarantee you experience has taught me, someone who said that once, I was a fool. don't be like me. Just be smart from the onset. Just do what the book says, and I promise the game will feel less like. Because when we hit the end of a mid game, you're gonna have one of two opinions. So we talked about the start of a mid game. Now I'm gonna talk about the end of one before we navigate the interplay between these. Right at the end of a mid game, if you didn't follow the recommendations of the book, what you're gonna find is your players are busted. They are insanely strong. They are rolling over everything you throw at them. No amount of mooks is too many. You can layer lieutenants in there like crazy. They're not leaving a mark. You can even throw like near 1-to-1 ratios of mini bosses, hardened ones even, and your players are somehow still doing pretty much just fine by the end. That is why we follow the book, because if you do that, then later your party will be much more like, oh yeah, I feel adequately challenged, and use the GM won't be like sweating bullets like, what do I throw at the party? They're too strong. I've been there many times over several campaigns. Please don't make my mistake.
Yeah. One of the other things that I feel like once you hit that mid game, maybe you've hit your first night market. Yeah, I feel like night market really is a good spot of like, maybe you're a little ways into the mid game, but it's definitely like, or it may be your first step into the mid game where you're finally buying your first 500 Eddie iron, or you're getting that 1,000 Eddie piece of gear that's going to make your life just a little bit easier.
You're getting out of your newbie gear and into something a little more powerful, because gear progression in this game, I think, is something that I don't think it's really inappropriate or incorrect to state that gear progression in this game is in a lot of ways is much shallower than it would be for something like a fantasy tabletop like D&D. But that's not for nothing. It's because even that shallow level of progression that you'll see over the length of a game is far more, you have to work far harder, I think, to get that increment of gain in this game comparatively. And each time you increment up one, it's a pretty big leap. Like when you finally get that ability as a netrunner to have your own body weight suit, or you have an excellent quality cyber deck for the first time. Like those are massive upgrades. Those are massive functionality improvements for your character.
So, one of the other parts of like mid game that I did mention is like people that you're going to be encountering. And this is also going to be a way that will bridge over into the second half of the episode. So Emmerron, when we talk about the people you encounter, now that we're like in the mid game, you got your nice you got your Militech Crusher. The tech's got that new Zetatech porta printer. Your MedTech just recently got chipped in with that Raven Micro Cybernetics Micro Waldo. Who are we dealing with that isn't so much like the opposition that are going to help write this story?
So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head initially when you said that night markets do a lot of that for us, especially depending upon what fixer is running the market. Because the reality is you don't need to be anyone special to know where a fixer's night market is per se. Some of the really big fixers, obviously, they're going to be like invite only, but that's more the realm of like a midnight market, right? Midnight markets are crazy. That almost definitionally like leads us into like the end of the mid game toward like just an end game altogether. Midnight markets are like you get one, maybe two tops in a whole campaign most of the time. because your players are almost never setting them up themselves. Because I have still, as we've talked about, as of now, never seen a player go beyond rank 7. Rank 7, I think, is pretty much where, like, I've seen players pretty much just cap out before the campaign was over. And so, typically, what that night market means, that first night market especially, is you're making connections like crazy at them. If you get to know the fixer in question, or maybe you've already been working for that fixer, like I know a lot of my campaigns are unafraid of Short Circuit. I love that bar, to be fair. It's like probably one of my favorite established bars in the fiction. And so for me, 3-piece by extension becomes a fixer that my players meet very, very early on. And 3-piece is like no slouch. I believe he's a rank 5 fixer, if memory serves.
Rank 5 fixer.
Yeah. So he's a little better than your average player fixer at the beginning of a game. And at minimum, probably, he's going to be on par with them by the time your mid-game starts. Meaning that if you do have a fixer in your party, they can work with someone like him. Or if your party doesn't have a fixer, he's got a decent amount of reach to other fixers of around that same caliber, like Wood Chipper or like Miss Mina. These other fixers that exist around the city that you could be getting gigs from. And the wider your reach goes between these fixers, the higher your reputation goes, the more important people hear about you. So there is where Diamond is kind of leading in here, the idea of an escalation, right? Over time, this is not necessarily always reflected, at least not immediately, by the enemies you're fighting are getting tougher, right? Because this isn't a game with like a really stringent character level system, like a game like Fabula Ultima, for example, would be. But it's one where rather your reputation and capability is more tested in a lot of this. So soft power matters. And this is something I think a lot of GMs, especially those coming from more levels-based systems like D&D, might initially do just a bit wrong with Cyberpunk Red, or I've seen it be done wrong. I've done it wrong. Like, this is not me judging anyone for getting this wrong. I've done it too. When you first come into Cyberpunk, you're going to look at how low everything kind of caps out at relative to where it begins. And you're going to think, that's not much. Like that the amount of ceiling from the floor here is not, it's not very high off the ground, but it's more than you think. And that's because a lot of those relationships you're going to build in the city and a lot of the ways in which you will find success are done through soft power. So that's, who do you know? It's like what you know matters for the kind of gigs that you're going to be tapped for. Who you know determines whether or not those gigs actually pan out like they are promised to be, right? That's the difference between getting sold a 500 Eddie gig that should really be paid 1,000, or being told, oh yeah, I'll pay you later, and not taking your Eddies up front, versus a fixer who will actually pay you in advance on a gig because they actually want the work done, not just an excuse to, have some free labor for an afternoon or something like that. So a lot of these fixers are going to then slowly escalate in terms of their access to things. The execs you meet along that path too are going to go from being these fairly low level, maybe team leaders within their organizations, to ones that actually manage sizable amounts of their groups. The players in my Monday game, for an example here, they're nearing the end game. They're pretty much like leading into the end game right now. They're in the late mid game. They've just gotten hired by a rank 7 exec, and that is how that has evolved, and that's started all from, I'm pretty sure three piece was a pretty early on hire of you guys. So that's where like starts with a rank 5 fixer, and the party had their own who was also kind of managing gigs at the start, and is now, they're ending up here at the upper end of the corporate echelon, essentially.
I I suppose, like, other folks that you'll come in contact with, you will, be able to, as you get, much more reputable job, like reputable pay, bigger jobs. The people you will encounter, though, do have some serious consequences. Mm-hmm. Whoever you decide to associate with, someone else, it may rub the wrong way with them. Mm-hmm. So, getting real cozy with, insert, the petrochem exec that's been employing you guys. Someone from Soboil might have a problem with this. Mm-hmm. Or, maybe, some folks that are not a fan of the way Rex runs one block. Basically keeping his, keeping the entire part of that zone under his thumb. You might make enemies that way if you, work for someone like Rex. Big reputation. Big guy. Oh.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I want to throw something because Null just said something in chat that made me kind of giggle a little bit, which is how to escalate. Sniper shot your party's favorite NPC mid-tender moment.
Yeah. Oh, that's awful.
That's awful, and I love it. Thank you. I responded to him in chat already. Those of you who are maybe looking at the little chat feed between our heads here might have just seen me respond to him with the word based. Because I've been known to do similar to my party in the past. It's fun. I think that ultimately reputation and how you gain it, what you become known for, is gonna quite literally define the entirety of your mid game. And when your party truly is now known as the group that does A, right? That is pretty much where the mid game ends and your end game starts to begin, because that is where you have changed from this ragtag group at the start of everything of, different people, or, maybe a couple of cliques, maybe you have two smaller groups that have now formed a crew together, to being a crew that does a variety of gigs and becomes known for doing certain gigs, right? And then at the end game, they are known for doing gigs of a certain type, so they're sent against the lion of all gigs of that type, basically, and are told, you and the opposition are going to come in, and only one of you is coming out of this. Either you come out of this alive, successful, or you're all going to die here, basically. There's very, very little in between for stuff like that, I think, once you hit the end game. Again, great, example from the lore itself is Edgerunners, the anime, because it's very, very much structured the same way, right? You got, young punk David Martinez eventually hooks up with a crew by total happenstance, starts running gigs with them to become known for something, and about the time that they become known for what they're good at that point, things really fly off the handlebars, and we start seeing the mid game turns into a late mid game, turns into an end game, and that's where we see how things wind up at the end of the series, is once that's resolved itself. That's a great template to kind of use if ever you're wondering what these things are supposed to look like in motion. That is how they kind of look in motion in the mid game, more than maybe any other phase of a campaign, is defined by your players, and you as a GM need to be unafraid to take a lead from your players in a lot of cases in the mid game, because they're going to value things differently or weigh things differently depending on what their individual goals are, or what they've decided as a crew their overall collective goal or goals are, and how they're going to maybe pursue those things or their agendas there.
Also, with mid game as well, if for say your campaign is like one larger overarching job, sort of like I would like to call back to something of the likes with Shake Palm 007, Tracy Goodwin. I was in I Know You Are a Twit, one of his satirical commentaries about tech bros buying social media and just doing really weird shit with it. When we had finally come across the discovery of UR finding some very questionable servers way down below the Euro Business building, that like once we found out like what UR was really digging into, that's when it all started clicking together and started taking us towards the end game. Your mid game, I'd say like what defines like the end of your mid game though is like when that major turning point happens, that your players are finally make that choice that sends them like down that last path where there is you've hit the point of no return. There is no other options for you besides forward.
Yep. It's and that's pretty much why reputation is such a formative element, I think, in defining what your end game is because the mid game's all about building it and like defining who you are. I know by the time the group I play with in real life, when we were going through Tales of the Red Street stories, we ended up being known as the South Night City Wolves by the time it was over, solely because of something our media did in the middle of a gig. I think it was Haven't Got a Stitch to Wear. We encountered this group of boosters that had been hired by the adversary in that, and it's just before we met up with a certain sniper. I'm not going to spoil too much here. One of our media, who's like a martial arts trained guy, who's also fairly squishy. It was really fun because I had to pick his ass up as the group's medtech repeatedly. He jumped off one of the buildings, slammed into one of these booster gangs, just like, "We are the wolves, motherfucker!" And that's how we became known. Like, suddenly we were the South Night City Wolves and nothing was ever going to change that. And things got pretty rapidly escalated from there. Because now we were a known quantity. We were no longer like, yeah, you just hire this group of edge runners. Like, they'll do gigs for you, whatever. No, we were the Wolves. You hired the Wolves. We are an organization of like 3 people, but we are an organization. Like, and so that's where your end game starts to take form, is the moment that you have a name for your group, the moment you're a known quantity as a collective in the city. Oh boy, yeah, that's where it starts to get fun.
I mean, our group at one point was developing as the problem solvers, and then we became the big fucking problem. Like, damn,
they just became the problem. Yeah,
we now become the Ouroboros of we solve the problem by consuming ourselves in this never-ending cycle that sends us spiraling into a mess, and it's bad. Help.
Remember, fellow listeners, every time you ask the city, "Can I win?" the city will say no, because as we all know, the city always wins. There is no winning against it. So yeah, no, that is the truest part of all of this. So other than that, so some general principles, I guess, as you're developing your mid game, just to both, I guess, recap and make sure I haven't missed anything in our somewhat meandering path towards the end of kind of the initial topic here. Thing number 1, GMs take leads from your players. Do not be afraid to give your players their own time to both develop their agendas, their goals, whether that's during downtime or like deciding upon, hey, there's this gig that, our med tech really wants to do because it's important to them. Ultimately, as long as something in that matters to the crew as a whole, or the crew is like, oh yeah, we owe our med tech, like let's help them do this thing that's really important to them, like that is perfectly fine. do not be afraid to take those kinds of leads from your players. It's both going to help you in the sense that they do the hard thing for you. They think about the next gig. You don't have to. You only have to prep for whatever they've decided they want to pursue. And then the second thing that I'll bring up here is when you start to notice your players escalating in their power, do not be afraid to, as their reputation grows especially, do not be afraid to give some of the enemies they'll go against tools for dealing with them more individualistically. And what I mean by that is if they're very much like cyberware loaded, they've got low light IR stuff, cool. So darkness isn't going to affect them. Flashbangs, maybe they've got anti-dazzle in there too. Flashbangs aren't going to affect them. Cool. So now they're going to carry a microwaver instead, because now they know you've got cyber optics. So they're just going to try and fry your eyes. And that's what they're going to do instead of trying to fry, your vision through a flashbang. They're just going to carry a microwaver because they're cheap enough, right? Maybe they know you've got a ton of armor. Suddenly they're going to carry some armor piercing rounds. That's something where you've got a tech on the party that's updated all of your firepower. Their techs are going to make sure that they're supplied with something that can sustain damage from it. There's this arms race that it's a soft arms race in a lot of cases in Cyberpunk. It doesn't happen too quickly, but the mid game is going to develop an arms race here where your players are going to start being countered more directly by the threats that they're sent against, because those threats are going to know that, or at least have good inclination potentially, that your group is the one that's coming for them. Especially if they're like a corp and particularly well informed, they really will know.
And I mean, Edge Runner crew versus Edge Runner crew is always a really solid matchup as well. So don't be afraid to, pitch that against a crew as well. That's proven to be viable.
Yep.
All right. Do we keep the topic the same for next episode? We just talk about Big Bad on that end, or what are we feeling?
Yeah, I don't think that it's not particularly far off the mark here. So my end of this week's episode might end up being just a tad shorter than it usually is. That is not a problem though. I think I've said most everything I want to about the mid game. But if there's something valuable that either chat, those of you who are here with us live tonight that have maybe some insight or aspect of things here that you've not heard us talk about and you'd like to hear us give our opinions on, or if you have any insights of your own that you'd like to add, feel free to, if you're here live, put it in chat. If you are watching this later, though, put it in the comments section of Spotify or YouTube, or email it to us at wireheadspod@googlegroups.com, and we will be happy to take it as part of Q&A. Although, Diamond, I think you've got something.
Yeah, and we're like right around the hour mark here. But one last thing, and we'll also talk about it since we're talking about like opposition in the mid game. But mid-game is also important for your characters to develop their relationships with their backstory as well. That is a very important time for your backstories to take place. Yeah. And we'll talk about how that can be used with and against the players also on the other half here.
Yeah. There's a reason I mentioned, do not be afraid to give your players agenda time for themselves, and to present things that matter to one or two of the players over the others, because the others will get their turn later in that context if you do that. And again, you want to try and play that fair. If you're gonna give one player or small group of players the time in the sun, you want to make sure to give it to the others as well. So just definitely worth mentioning here. But yeah, that is definitely a bigger part of kind of the second half of today's topic. So I guess with that said, as I mentioned before, and as Diamond mentioned early on in my half of the episode, all of our socials are located in the description below, regardless of if you're watching one of the halves that are me or the halves that are on Diamond's channel. We are all listed down there, all our socials. Yeah, if you want to come hang out with us when we record these live, you can come by our Twitch, either one of them. We join our chats together. We have a wonderful time every Thursday night. Again, that starts at either 4:30 Pacific, 6:30 Central, 7:30 Eastern. Those of you who are international, this is the one place in which I claim my American exceptionalism, because those are the time zones I know. So here, damn, Emmerron is like weirdly nationalist.
I'm going to be in the same time zone as you here. Oh, yes. Fun fact. 2 months. I'll be in the same time zone as Emmerron.
Hopefully we'll be like something close to neighbors. It's going to be a good time.
It'll be a great time.
It'll be a really
maybe
great
I'll
time.
actually, show up on screen, I'll show up in the meet. I mean, in the.
She'll take the place of Althane here, basically. When it all pans out, I'll have to like scoot over to the right of the frame a little more. It'll be good.
Yeah, we'll just need to make big frame then.
Oh yeah, easy. But yeah, so that is, however, going to be it for my half of the episode. So if you are watching this on YouTube in specific, go down below to the description to go to Diamond's half of the episode. It will be linked down there, as long as we've done everything right this week. We've had a few weeks where I'm a little late getting the link down there, but it will be there. If it's not there as I say this in the video you are watching right now, check back in like a day or so at most. It'll be down there. So all that said, that is it for my half of the episode. So we are going to go over to Diamonds now. So I will see you over there, guys. But until next week, hope you have a wonderful morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever around the world. Stay healthy, stay safe. Till next time, peace.
Bye-bye.